My name is Claire, and I am 9 months pregnant. It's a strange mix of emotions, excitement, anxiety, and exhaustion all bundled up inside me as I prepare to meet the tiny miracle growing within me. This will be my first child, a milestone I've dreamed about for years, yet my heart is heavy. Why? Because Marcus, my husband, doesn't seem to share the same excitement. Marcus is a white-collar worker, a job he claims is grueling, though I've never seen him bring home anything but his briefcase and excuses. He spends his weekends at his parents' house, just a few miles away, but might as well be another planet. No reason, no specific purpose, just an escape from the home we're supposed to be building together. Our marriage, now in its 3rd year, doesn't feel like the fairy tale I imagined when we said our vows. Back then, I believed we'd share everything: a love, laughter, and responsibilities. Yet here I am, heavily pregnant, still cleaning up after him, cooking meals he doesn't appreciate, and keeping the house in order while he watches TV or escapes to his parents. I've become so used to this routine that it barely surprises me anymore. Take today, for example. Marcus came home from work, dropped his bag on the sofa, shrugged off his jacket, and headed straight for the bathroom without even a hello. I followed behind, tidying his trail like a shadow, wondering if he even noticed I was there. Dinner was ready, hamburgers, his favorite, but all I got was a gruff, "I'm taking a bath." 3 years. 3 years of this cold, routine existence where kindness seems to have vanished, leaving behind only indifference. I still prepare his meals, but he doesn't thank me. I clean the house, do the laundry, and even shop for heavy groceries while waddling through the store with my huge belly, yet he barely acknowledges my efforts. I feel like a maid, not a wife. But I'm not writing this to complain. I'm not even sure what I'm hoping to achieve. Maybe putting my thoughts into words will help me sort through the tangle of emotions weighing me down. Maybe someone somewhere will understand. Every morning starts the same. I wake up early, make breakfast, and see Marcus off to work. He barely looks at me as he leaves, and I tell myself it's because he's busy, not because he doesn't care. After he's gone, I dive into my chores: cleaning, laundry, shopping. It's exhausting, especially now, but I've always prided myself on running our home smoothly. Lately, though, I've found a small escape, a hobby really. I've started blogging. Nothing fancy, just a daily diary with photos of meals I cook, flowers blooming in the garden, or the blue sky on a sunny day. It's a way to remind myself of the beauty in life, to hold on to the little things that bring me joy. And surprisingly, people read it. They leave comments, words of encouragement that brighten my day. I wonder what they'd say if they knew the truth. If they knew how lonely I feel in this house, in this marriage. I wonder if they'd still find my posts uplifting if they knew I cried myself to sleep some nights. But I can't focus on that now. I have a baby to think about, a tiny life depending on me. I need to be strong, to prepare myself for the challenge ahead. This child deserves all the love and care I can give, even if Marcus doesn't see it the same way. Still, a small part of me hopes. Hopes that when the baby arrives, things will change. That Marcus will soften, that he'll look at our child and realize what truly matters. That he'll finally see me, not just as the woman he married, but as the partner who's been holding our family together. It's a fragile hope, but it's all I have right now. And as I sit here writing this, I can't help but wonder, am I naive to hold on to it? Or is it the one thing keeping me from falling apart? For now, I'll keep going. I'll cook dinner, clean the house, and take photos of the flowers outside. I'll keep writing my blog, holding onto the small joys that remind me life can still be beautiful. And maybe, just maybe, when the baby comes, everything will change. The tension between Marcus and me had always been there, quietly simmering beneath the surface. But since I became pregnant, it felt like the heat had been turned up, and I was the one left to endure the burn. Marcus had always been particular, demanding, even, but his lack of understanding during my pregnancy took things to another level. Take yesterday, for example. I had gone out to pick up groceries, hauling a bag of rice home because Marcus, as usual, was at his parents' house. By the time I got back, I was exhausted, my feet swollen, my back aching. As I placed the bag down, All I wanted was a moment to breathe, but Marcus walked in as though he were a guest in his own home, barely glancing at me as he shrugged off his coat. "I forgot to buy beer," he announced as he sat down. I stared at him, dumbfounded. "Well, it'll have to wait until tomorrow," I said, trying to sound calm despite the frustration bubbling up inside me. But Marcus didn't take no for an answer. "Go get it now," he snapped, as though I was some employee failing to meet his unreasonable demands. I looked down at my swollen belly, feeling the weight of it, not just physically, but emotionally. "You're asking me, your pregnant wife, to go out at night to get beer because you forgot to remind me earlier?" He didn't even flinch. "It's not a big deal. Pregnant women are supposed to stay active, right? My mom always says it's good for you." The mention of his mother, again. It was like a dagger to the heart every time he compared me to her. She was perfect in his eyes, a woman who could do no wrong, and I was always falling short of her standard. Still, I knew better than to argue. Marcus didn't calm down easily when he was angry, and I had no energy for a fight. I grabbed my coat and headed to the convenience store, feeling a mix of humiliation and anger. Outside, the night air was cool, but it did little to soothe me. My steps were slow, deliberate, as I tried to avoid thinking too much about how unfair it all felt. At the store, I ran into Julia, my neighbor, who always seemed to be in good spirits. "Claire, out late tonight?" she asked, her cheerful tone a stark contrast to my mood. "Just picking up something for Marcus," I replied, forcing a smile. She frowned. "Couldn't he come himself? You're so close to your due date." I shrugged, unwilling to say more. Julia didn't press, but her concern was evident. "Take care of yourself, okay?" she said as we parted ways. By the time I got back home, Marcus was sprawled on the sofa, watching TV, the remnants of dinner still on the table. He didn't even look up when I walked in. "What took you so long?" he muttered, snatching the beer from my hand. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell him how much he was hurting me with his words, his actions, or lack thereof. But I stayed silent, cleaning up the dishes while he drank his beer and watched his show as though nothing had happened. It wasn't just the beer or the grocery trips. It was the way he dismissed everything I did, every effort I made to keep our home running. It was the way he looked at me, not with love or appreciation, but with indifference. And yet, I kept hoping. Maybe tomorrow would be better. Maybe he'd wake up and see how hard I was trying. Maybe he'd remember the woman he fell in love with, the woman who was now carrying his child. But deep down, I knew better. Tomorrow wouldn't be any different. Marcus would wake up, complain about breakfast, and leave for work without a second thought. And I would keep going, because what choice did I have? As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, the weight of it all pressed down on me. I was tired, physically, emotionally, and mentally. The man I had married, the man I thought would be my partner in life, had become a stranger to me. But even as my tears soaked the pillow, I resolved to keep going. Not for Marcus, but for my baby. This child would have a mother who loved them unconditionally, who fought through the pain and loneliness to give them a better life. And maybe, just maybe, one day Marcus would realize what he'd lost. But until then, I had to keep moving forward. For my baby and for myself. The day my water broke was supposed to be just another exhausting chapter in my routine. I had been dragging my feet, trying to mentally prepare myself for a trip that Marcus had planned, not for us, but for his family. I had argued that it was too close to my due date, that traveling wasn't safe, but he dismissed me like always. "You're pregnant, not sick," he said, waving off my concerns. "Just sit in the car and rest. You'll be fine." Fine. That was Marcus's favorite word to describe anything inconvenient for him. Whether it was my exhaustion, my swelling feet, or the extra effort I had to put into doing chores with a massive belly, everything was fine in his eyes. The morning of the trip, I tried one last time to back out. "Marcus, I'm not feeling well today," I told him, my voice trembling with a mixture of anxiety and fatigue. "I really think it's better if I stay home." He gave me a look that could have frozen fire. "Claire, we're going. Don't make this difficult." I bit my lip, holding back the retort bubbling in my throat. What was the point? He wouldn't listen. He never did. So I resigned myself to his will, packed my bag, and got into the car, feeling the familiar knot of resentment tightening in my chest. As we drove, the air between us was thick with silence. Marcus tapped impatiently on the steering wheel, clearly annoyed by my reluctance, while I stared out the window, trying to calm the storm brewing inside me. And then it happened. I felt a sudden warmth spreading around my feet. For a moment, I thought I'd spilled something, but when I looked down, I realized with a jolt of panic that my water had broken. "Marcus, my water just broke," I said, my voice shaking. "We need to go to the hospital. Now." He glanced at me, his expression blank at first, and then twisted into irritation. "Are you serious?" "Yes, the baby is coming." But instead of the urgency I expected, Marcus sighed heavily, pulling over to the side of the road. He opened his door, grabbed a towel from the back seat, and muttered something under his breath. "What are you doing?" I demanded, panic rising in my chest. "You're going to ruin the car," he snapped, tossing the towel at my feet. "Get out. I'll clean this up." I stared at him, stunned. "Marcus, I'm in labor. We need to go to the hospital." But he was already out of the car, his focus entirely on the mess. When he opened my door and tried to pull me out, I yanked my arm away, tears streaming down my face. "Stop it. This isn't about the car. It's about our baby." His response was chilling. "You're being dramatic. Just go to the hospital on your own. I'll meet you there later." And with that, he drove off, leaving me standing on the side of the road, clutching my belly and sobbing as pain began to ripple through my body. I don't know how long I stood there, paralyzed by a mix of shock, fear, and heartbreak. Then, out of nowhere, I heard a familiar voice. "Claire? Are you okay?" It was Julia, my neighbor. She must have been running an errand nearby because she pulled over the moment she saw me. "My water broke," I choked out. He left me." Julia didn't hesitate. She called for a special taxi, helped me into the car, and held my hand the entire ride to the hospital. Her presence was a lifeline, grounding me as my world crumbled. When we arrived, she stayed by my side, comforting me and making sure I got the care I needed. She even contacted my parents, who rushed to the hospital with worry etched on their faces. As I lay in the hospital bed, gripping Julia's hand through the contractions, a single thought echoed in my mind. This is it. This is the breaking point. I wasn't just angry at Marcus anymore. I was done. Done with his neglect, his selfishness, and his complete lack of regard for me or our baby. In the quiet moments between contractions, I made a vow. This was the last time he would hurt me, the last time I would let him make me feel small and insignificant. With Julia and my parents by my side, I knew I wasn't alone. And for the first time in months, I felt a spark of hope. Hope that I could build a better life for myself and for my child. When I think back to that day, I don't know how I would have made it without Julia. She didn't just save me physically, she anchored me emotionally when everything was unraveling. After the doctors settled me into a room, Julia never once left my side. She sat next to me, held my hand, and whispered words of encouragement every time another contraction hit. I don't think I'd ever realized how strong she was until that moment. But Julia's support didn't stop there. While I was still trying to breathe through the pain, she called my parents to let them know what had happened. I couldn't hear the exact words, but I could see the fire in her eyes as she recounted how Marcus had abandoned me. I was sure my parents were just as furious as she was. When they arrived at the hospital, their faces were a mix of worry and rage. My mom immediately rushed to my side, her hands trembling as she brushed my hair away from my face. "Oh, Claire, we're here now," she said, her voice thick with emotion. My dad, always the quieter one, sat on the other side of the bed and took my hand in his grip firm and reassuring. Julia leaned in and whispered something to them, something that made my mom's lips press into a thin line and my dad's jaw tighten. Then the three of them stepped outside, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the contractions that seemed to be getting stronger by the minute. Even through the pain, I couldn't stop wondering what they were discussing. Knowing Julia, she was probably planning something, and knowing my parents, they were absolutely on board. A nurse came in shortly after to check on me, her voice gentle as she asked about my pain and comfort level. She adjusted my pillows and smiled warmly, making it clear she knew what had happened. "Don't worry, sweetie," she said softly. "You've got a good team here. You just focus on bringing that baby into the world." Her words, though kind, stirred up a mix of emotions in me. A good team. I did have a good team, but Marcus wasn't part of it. The realization stung more than I expected, but it also fueled my determination to rely on the people who truly cared about me. Hours passed, and the labor pains grew more intense. My parents returned to the room, their faces softer now, but still shadowed by concern. My mom stayed close, wiping my forehead with a damp cloth, while my dad sat quietly, his presence steady and comforting. Julia eventually excused herself, saying she needed to make a quick phone call. I didn't think much of it at the time, too focused on enduring the next contraction, but when she returned, there was a look in her eyes I hadn't seen before, something fierce and unyielding. "Everything's being taken care of," she said cryptically, squeezing my shoulder. I didn't have the energy to ask what she meant, but I trusted her. Julia had already proven she was in my corner, and whatever she was doing, I knew it was for my benefit. As the hours dragged on, I clung to the support around me. My parents stayed with me through every moment, their strength a balm for my frayed nerves. Julia popped in and out, always checking to make sure I was okay, her presence as reassuring as my mom's hand on my forehead. When it was finally time to deliver, Julia was the one who helped transfer me to the delivery room. She gave me a confident smile, her voice steady as she said, "You've got this, Claire. I'll be right here when it's all over." Her words stayed with me through every push, every scream, and every ounce of pain. And when I finally heard my baby's first cry, the relief that washed over me was indescribable. Later, after I was settled back in my room and the baby was whisked away for routine tests, I asked my mom what Julia had whispered to her earlier. She told us about Marcus, my mom said, her tone calm but resolute. And she has a plan to make sure he doesn't get away with what he did. I blinked, processing her words. "A plan?" My dad nodded. "Julia's husband is, well, let's just say he's in a position to make things right. Don't worry about the details now. Just rest." I wanted to ask more, but exhaustion pulled me under. As I drifted off, I felt a strange mix of emotions, gratitude for Julia, anger at Marcus, and a deep sense of relief that I wasn't facing this alone. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I had a real support system, people who cared about me and were willing to fight for me when I didn't have the strength to fight for myself. And as I closed my eyes, one thought echoed in my mind. This isn't over. Not by a long shot. I don't know if Marcus ever expected his actions to catch up with him, but when they did, it hit him like a freight train. It all started with Julia. She had quietly taken the lead, coordinating with her husband, Ryan, who happened to be the CEO of Marcus's company. I had known Julia for years, but never realized just how connected she was. She had always downplayed her status, focusing instead on being a good neighbor and friend. But now, she was proving that when she cared about someone, she didn't hold back. The turning point came when one of Julia's social media-savvy friends posted about what happened to me. It wasn't meant to go viral, it was just an emotional plea for people to be kinder to pregnant women. But the post included a short video, taken by a stranger, of Marcus abandoning me on the side of the road. The video was blurry, and my face had been carefully obscured for privacy, but Marcus's voice was loud and clear. His words were unmistakable, "Get out. You're going to mess up the car." Within hours, the video exploded online. Comments poured in outrage, disgust, and disbelief that a man could treat his pregnant wife so cruelly. People began digging, and it wasn't long before Marcus's identity was uncovered. His name, his job, even his family, all of it was dragged into the spotlight. When I first found out, I was stunned. Julia was the one who told me, sitting beside my hospital bed with her usual calm demeanor. "You need to know this is happening," she said, her tone careful. "I didn't post it, but someone did, and it's spreading fast. She handed me her phone, and there it was, a flood of comments and shares. People were furious. Some were calling for Marcus to lose his job, while others were simply horrified by his behavior. I didn't know how to feel. On one hand, it felt like justice. After everything he had put me through, it was almost satisfying to see people holding him accountable. But on the other hand, it was overwhelming. The idea of my private pain being turned into public outrage was hard to process. Then came the phone calls. My phone buzzed constantly with missed calls and messages from Marcus. He left voicemails alternating between anger and desperation. "Claire, this has gone too far. You need to fix this," one message said. Another was full of pleading. "Please, Claire, call me back. I can't lose my job over this." I didn't respond to any of them. I couldn't. Every time his name popped up on my screen, it brought back the memory of him driving away, leaving me stranded and in pain. My parents were just as furious. My mom, normally the gentlest soul, looked like she was ready to march over to Marcus's parents' house and give them a piece of her mind. My dad, ever the practical one, quietly made arrangements to strengthen the security at our home, just in case. Meanwhile, Julia's husband had taken action at Marcus's workplace. Ryan was livid when he found out what had happened and wasted no time calling Marcus in for a disciplinary meeting. According to Julia, the meeting was short and devastating. Marcus tried to defend himself, but Ryan wasn't interested in excuses. "Family comes first," Ryan had told him. "If you can't treat your own family with respect, how can I trust you in this company?" The fallout was immediate. Marcus was suspended pending an investigation, and word quickly spread among his colleagues. From what Julia told me, his coworkers were less than sympathetic. At the same time, the internet wasn't letting up. Marcus's parents were dragged into the fray, with people criticizing them for raising a man capable of such cruelty. I even heard rumors that their neighbors had started avoiding them, unwilling to associate with a family so publicly shamed. It was a whirlwind of consequences, and though I hadn't orchestrated any of it, I couldn't deny a small sense of vindication. For so long, Marcus had made me feel powerless, like my feelings didn't matter. But now, the world was seeing him for who he truly was, and he couldn't hide behind his charm or his excuses anymore. I stayed quiet through it all, focusing on my recovery and my baby. When my parents asked me how I felt about everything, I told them the truth. I didn't ask for this, but I'm not going to stop it either. My dad nodded in agreement. He made his choices, Claire. Now he has to live with them. Julia, of course, had her own take on the situation. One evening, as she visited me in the hospital, she smirked and said, "You know, karma works fast these days. It's almost impressive." We both laughed, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a genuine sense of relief. Marcus was finally facing the consequences of his actions, and I didn't have to lift a finger. As the days went on, the public backlash only grew, but I stayed focused on what truly mattered: my health, my baby, and the people who had stood by me through it all. Marcus had made his bed, and now he had to lie in it alone. The calls never stopped. Marcus's name constantly lit up my phone screen, but I couldn't bring myself to answer. What could he possibly say to undo everything he'd done? The moments replayed in my mind like a haunting melody: the car door slamming, his voice cold and indifferent as he told me to go to the hospital by yourself. Those words were branded into my memory, and no apology could erase them. At first, his voicemails were full of anger. "Claire, you need to call me back. This has gotten out of control. You're letting the internet ruin my life." But as days passed, his tone shifted. Desperation seeped in, his once cocky attitude crumbling under the weight of public scrutiny. "Claire, please, can we talk? I made a mistake. I need you to fix this. Fix this." Always expecting me to clean up his messes, even now. I deleted the voicemails without hesitation. Julia, ever the sharp and resourceful ally, suggested I take legal action. "You shouldn't have to deal with this nonsense while recovering," she said, her voice firm. She had already spoken to her husband, Ryan, who offered to connect me with a lawyer. My parents wholeheartedly agreed. My dad was especially eager to protect me from further harm. "Claire, you've been through enough. Let the lawyer handle him." So, I reached out. The lawyer, Mr. Turner, was a calm, confident man who listened intently as I recounted everything: the abandonment, the viral video, the endless harassment. He nodded thoughtfully, taking detailed notes before leaning back in his chair. "This is a clear case," he said. "You're well within your rights to seek a divorce and financial support for your child. We'll also ensure he understands the consequences of his actions." Hearing those words felt like a weight had been lifted. For so long, I had carried the burden of Marcus's mistreatment alone, but now I had a team behind me, my parents, Julia, and Mr. Turner, all ready to fight for me. When Marcus received notice of the legal proceedings, his reaction was predictable. He called me immediately, but I let it go to voicemail. His message was a mix of outrage and disbelief. "Claire, what are you doing? We don't need a lawyer to sort this out. This is between us." Mr. Turner, unbothered by Marcus's attempts to bypass the system, reached out to him directly. The next call I received wasn't from Marcus, but from the lawyer himself. He was resistant at first, Mr. Turner explained with a wry smile. But when I mentioned the possibility of court proceedings, he changed his tune. Apparently, the mere thought of a courtroom had been enough to shake Marcus. He reluctantly agreed to discuss terms, though not without a few tantrums along the way. The mediation process was tense. I attended remotely, sitting beside Mr. Turner while Marcus, visibly uncomfortable, dialed in from another location. His first words were predictably self-centered. "Claire, this is all a misunderstanding. I made a mistake, but you're blowing it out of proportion." I stayed silent, letting Mr. Turner handle the conversation. He presented the evidence calmly: the viral video, the messages, the testimony from Julia and my parents. Marcus tried to deflect, claiming he had prior commitments that day, but his excuses crumbled under the weight of his own words. As the discussion turned to financial matters, Marcus's true colors emerged. "I don't see why I should pay child support. I don't even want to be involved with a child. Why should I be punished for something I don't care about?" His callousness hit me like a punch to the gut, but Mr. Turner didn't miss a beat. "Your obligations as a father are not optional. The court will see to that if necessary." Marcus's face twisted in frustration, and for a moment, I thought he might hang up. But instead, he slumped back in his chair, defeated. "Fine," he muttered. "Just get it over with." The agreements were finalized shortly after. Marcus would provide child support and relinquish any claim to joint assets. The divorce would proceed smoothly, without further interference from him. When the call ended, I let out a shaky breath, a mix of relief and exhaustion washing over me. Mr. Turner gave me a reassuring nod. "You did well, Claire. He's out of your life now." I wanted to believe him, but deep down, I knew Marcus wouldn't go quietly. He thrived on control, and losing it would only make him more desperate. Sure enough, the next day, my phone buzzed with another call from Marcus. I almost didn't answer, but something compelled me to pick up. "Claire," he started, his voice uncharacteristically soft. "I'm sorry. Let's just forget all this and start over. For the baby." I felt a surge of anger rise in me, but I forced myself to stay calm. "This conversation is being recorded, Marcus," I said evenly. "I suggest you stop talking." The shock in his voice was almost comical. "Wait, what? You're recording me? That's not fair." I hung up without another word, letting the lawyer handle the rest. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of control over my life. Marcus could no longer dictate my choices or undermine my worth. I was free to focus on my baby, my family, and the future I deserved. It's strange how quickly life can unravel when the truth comes to light. For Marcus, the fallout from his actions was both swift and unrelenting. It started with the public backlash. The viral video of him abandoning me at the side of the road had spread like wildfire, and with it came an avalanche of criticism. People dissected his behavior in excruciating detail, condemning not just him, but also his upbringing, his values, and even his family. Initially, Marcus tried to brush it off. People forget about these things in a week, he'd told a mutual acquaintance, confident that the outrage would die down. But this wasn't just a passing scandal, it was a reckoning. Julia's husband, Ryan, made sure of that. Marcus's employer had a strict code of conduct, valuing employees who embodied integrity and family values. When Ryan saw the video and learned about Marcus's treatment of me, he acted decisively. He's a liability, Ryan told Julia, who relayed the conversation to me. Someone who can't respect their own family can't be trusted in our organization. Marcus was summoned for a disciplinary meeting. From what Julia shared, it didn't go well for him. He tried to deflect blame, painting himself as a victim of a misunderstanding, but Ryan wasn't buying it. "You abandoned your pregnant wife in distress," Ryan reportedly said. "There's no misunderstanding here." The suspension came first, followed by termination. Marcus's smug demeanor crumbled as he realized the gravity of his situation. Losing his job meant losing the financial stability he had always flaunted, and with the divorce proceedings in motion, his life was spiraling out of control. But it didn't stop there. The internet wasn't done with him yet. As people dug deeper, details about his family surfaced. Stories of how his parents had coddled him, enabling his entitlement, began circulating. Neighbors in their community started whispering, sharing tales of Marcus's arrogance and his parents' dismissive attitudes. One day, I received a message from Julia. "You're not going to believe this," she wrote, attaching a screenshot of a local community forum. In it, someone had posted a photo of Marcus's parents' house with the caption, "Raising a man who abandons his pregnant wife? Shameful." I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. It was surreal to see strangers holding them accountable for years of enabling Marcus's behavior. Meanwhile, Marcus's finances began to crumble. Without a job, he couldn't keep up with the mortgage payments on the home we had shared. He was forced to sell it at a loss, moving back into his parents' house. From what I heard through mutual acquaintances, the once proud Marcus was reduced to taking odd jobs just to make ends meet. Even his friends turned on him. One of them, Greg, reached out to me after hearing about the divorce. "I can't believe he did this to you, Claire," he said. "We used to think he had it all together, but now, I don't even recognize him." Greg's words confirmed what I already knew. Marcus had built his life on a fragile foundation of arrogance and neglect, and now it was all collapsing. But the most telling moment came when my dad answered a call from Marcus's parents. They had always been quick to criticize me, blaming me for any tension in my marriage, but this time was different. "She's part of our family," Marcus's mother said, her voice pleading. "Can't she just forgive him and come back? He's lost everything, and he needs her." My dad's response was swift and firm. "Your son made his choices. My daughter isn't responsible for fixing his mistakes." Hearing about that conversation filled me with a sense of validation I hadn't realized I needed. For years, Marcus's parents had belittled me, blaming me for every hiccup in our marriage. But now, even they couldn't ignore the consequences of their son's actions. As for Marcus, the last I heard, he was barely scraping by. The viral video had tarnished his reputation so thoroughly that no reputable company would hire him. He had become a cautionary tale, a man who threw away his family and future for the sake of his own ego. There's a part of me that feels pity for him. I imagine him sitting in his parents' living room, surrounded by reminders of the life he used to have, wondering where it all went wrong. But that part of me is small, dwarfed by the relief of knowing I'm no longer tied to him or his toxicity. His downfall wasn't something I orchestrated or even wanted. It was a natural consequence of his own behavior. And while I've moved on, focusing on my baby and the new life I'm building, Marcus remains trapped in the mess he created. In the end, he lost not just his job and his reputation, but also the chance to be part of something beautiful, our child's life. That's a loss he'll carry forever, and it's one I'll never have to share. After everything I had been through, starting over felt like stepping into a new world. It wasn't an easy transition. I had been weighed down by Marcus's neglect and cruelty for so long that the idea of a life without him felt foreign. But as I settled into my parents' home with my baby, I began to feel the weight lifting, little by little. My parents had always been my rock, but now they went above and beyond to make sure I felt supported. They had prepared a cozy room for me and the baby, complete with soft curtains and a crib that my dad had painstakingly assembled. My mom stocked the shelves with baby supplies, and every day she cooked meals that were both comforting and nourishing. Focus on healing, my mom would say every morning as she carried the baby so I could get a few extra hours of rest. My dad would chime in with a reassuring smile, "We've got this." And they did. For the first time in years, I felt like I was part of a real family, a family that cared for me without expecting anything in return. Julia remained a constant presence in my life, too. She visited often, bringing little gifts for the baby and always checking to see how I was holding up. Her husband, Ryan, even stopped by one evening, bringing a beautiful bouquet of flowers and a heartfelt apology for Marcus's behavior. "Claire," he said, his tone serious, "I had no idea things were so bad. If I'd known earlier, I would have done something sooner." I assured him it wasn't his fault, but his words meant a lot to me. Knowing that people like Julia and Ryan were on my side gave me strength. As the weeks turned into months, I began to find joy in the little things. My baby's first smile was like a ray of sunshine breaking through the clouds. Late-night feedings, though exhausting, became moments of quiet connection where I whispered promises to my child about the life we'd build together. I also found myself leaning on Julia more than I ever expected. One day, over tea, she said something that stuck with me. "Claire, this is your time to rebuild. You've been through hell, but you came out stronger. Don't let anyone dim that light." Her encouragement gave me the push I needed to start thinking about my future. I began writing again, not just for my blog, but for myself. Writing had always been my outlet, and now it became a way to process everything I had endured. One afternoon, Julia invited me and my parents over for dinner. It was a casual gathering, but it turned into something much more meaningful. Julia's son, Adam, was home from a business trip, and it was the first time we'd met. Adam was polite and easygoing, with a warm smile that immediately put me at ease. He spent most of the evening chatting with my dad about work, but every now and then, he'd glance my way with a curious expression, as if he was trying to figure me out. After dinner, as we all sat in Julia's cozy living room, Adam struck up a conversation with me. "So, Julia tells me you're a writer," he said, his tone genuine. "That's amazing. What do you write about?" I hesitated for a moment, unsure how much to share. But something about his openness made me feel safe. "Right now, it's mostly personal stuff. Journaling, reflections. It helps me make sense of things." He nodded thoughtfully. "That's important. Writing has a way of bringing clarity, doesn't it?" Our conversation flowed effortlessly, and by the end of the evening, I realized I hadn't laughed so much in years. It felt good. Over the next few months, Adam and I crossed paths more frequently, often at Julia's house or during family gatherings. He was kind, attentive, and nothing like Marcus. Where Marcus had been dismissive, Adam was curious. Where Marcus had been cold, Adam was warm. At first, I resisted the idea of anything more than friendship. After all, I had just come out of a marriage that had left me scarred. But Adam never pushed. He was patient, letting me set the pace, and slowly I began to trust again. One evening, as we walked through a nearby park with the baby bundled in a stroller, Adam stopped and turned to me. "Claire, I know you've been through a lot, and I don't want to rush anything. But I just want you to know that I admire you. Your strength, your resilience, it's inspiring." His words caught me off guard, and for a moment I didn't know how to respond. But then I smiled, feeling a warmth I hadn't felt in a long time. "Thank you, Adam. That means more than you know." Our relationship grew gradually, built on mutual respect and understanding. Adam never tried to replace what I had lost, but he gave me hope for what I could gain. As my new life unfolded, I realized that the darkness of my past no longer defined me. I had a beautiful baby, a supportive family, and a future that felt bright for the first time in years. And as I stood in the sunlight one afternoon, watching my child giggle at Adam's silly faces, I thought to myself, this is what a new beginning looks like. This is what happiness feels like. If someone had told me a year ago that my life would look like this, peaceful, supported, and full of hope, I wouldn't have believed them. But here I was, surrounded by the warmth of people who truly cared for me, leaving behind a chapter of my life that had once felt inescapable. My baby and I were thriving. My parents had become an integral part of our daily routine, my mom doting over her grandchild while my dad proudly called himself the best diaper changer in the world. I was healing, both physically and emotionally, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I could breathe freely. Yet, amid all this joy, there was one thing I still needed to do. Thank Julia. Julia had been my lifeline during the darkest days, offering her time, support, and even risking her privacy to ensure that justice was served. I owed her more than words could ever express. One quiet afternoon, I packed a basket with homemade treats and bundled my baby up for a visit to Julia's house. My parents were thrilled by the idea and insisted on joining me. She deserves to know how much we appreciate her, my dad said as he carried the basket to the car. When we arrived, Julia greeted us with her usual warm smile, but I could tell she wasn't expecting this kind of formal gratitude. "What's all this?" she asked, eyeing the basket with curiosity. "It's just a little thank you," I said, holding back tears. "For everything you've done for me, for my baby, for my family. I don't know where I'd be without you." Julia's eyes softened as she pulled me into a hug. "Claire, you've been through so much. I couldn't just stand by and watch. That's what friends are for." Her humility only made me more emotional. "It's not just about what you did, it's about how you did it. You didn't hesitate to step in when I felt completely alone. You made me feel like I mattered." Julia laughed lightly, brushing off the praise. "You do matter, Claire. And I didn't do it alone." Ryan and I were both furious when we found out what Marcus had done. Honestly, we just wanted to see you happy again. As we sat in her cozy living room, sipping tea and chatting, I couldn't help but reflect on how much had changed. Julia had gone from being a friendly neighbor to someone I considered family. Her husband, Ryan, had gone out of his way to ensure that Marcus faced consequences for his actions, and even their son, Adam, had become a constant source of support in my life. "Speaking of Ryan," Julia said, her eyes twinkling, "he's got a little surprise for you." Before I could ask what she meant, Ryan walked into the room holding a small envelope. "We wanted to give you something," he said, handing it to me. Inside was a handwritten note and a voucher for a luxury weekend getaway, complete with childcare arrangements provided by Julia and Ryan. "We thought you could use some time to yourself," Ryan said with a grin. I was speechless. "This is too much," I stammered. Julia shook her head. "It's exactly what you deserve. You've been putting everyone else first. Now it's time to focus on you." I felt a lump rise in my throat as I thanked them, my voice thick with emotion. The kindness they had shown me went beyond anything I could have imagined, and I knew I would spend the rest of my life trying to repay it. In the weeks that followed, I found ways to express my gratitude. I helped Julia with community events, babysat for her whenever she needed, and made an effort to strengthen the bond between our families. My parents and hers grew close, often hosting each other for dinners and game nights. Even Adam became a regular presence in my life, his calm demeanor and gentle humor a steadying force as I navigated single motherhood. He never pushed for anything more than I was ready to give, but the warmth in his eyes when he looked at me spoke volumes. One evening, as we walked through the neighborhood with my baby in tow, Adam said something that stayed with me. "You've come so far, Claire. It's inspiring to see how much strength you've found." I smiled, feeling a quiet pride in how far I had come. "I couldn't have done it without all of you." The truth was, my life had taken a turn I never expected. What had once felt like an unbearable tragedy had transformed into an opportunity for growth, healing, and love. As I tucked my baby into bed that night, I whispered a promise to them. "We're going to be okay. Better than okay. We have so much to look forward to." And for the first time in years, I truly believed it.